Hello, my name is Gurpreet Dhillon and I'm a professor of information security at Virginia Commonwealth University in Richmond, Virginia. Today, the topic of our discussion is cybersecurity resource allocation. By resource allocation, what I really mean is how the limited resources of a firm can be allocated for the protection of information assets of a firm. Protection of information assets, as we all know, is a big challenge for many of the companies today, but the amount of money that is typically allocated for cybersecurity is limited at best. Now, given the limited amount of money that we have, how do we allocate those resources? And resources do not necessarily come just in money. It could be people, it could be the capabilities that we want to develop, it might be the skill sets that need to be enhanced. How do we allocate all these resources such that we are able to be capable and competent enough for the protection of our enterprise? So these are some of the issues that we will be discussing today. One of the fundamental things that needs to be considered before we start allocating resources for cybersecurity management is the clarity that we need in defining cybersecurity objectives. Any company at any stage needs to prioritize, need to understand what they're trying to achieve and what kind of resources and assets that they're trying to protect. Only if we know what the information assets are, then can we come up with some kind of a strategy, some kind of a plan for protecting and allocating the necessary resources. So where should one start? I like thinking of a resource allocation problem at 4 different levels. And the first one is what is in our resource inventory, which really means what kind of roles do we currently have in the organization, what kind of skill sets do we possess in the company. And a combination of the roles and skills defines our resource inventory. I mean, many a times people tend to confuse resources with money, and that's probably a very singular thought that people tend to have, that if we have good amount of money, then we can probably be secure. Unfortunately, that is not the case. We have to think of the first very fundamental element in allocating resources, and that is of what roles do you need to create, what kind of skill sets do you need to have. Now, if we do not have the right kind of an organization structure which nurtures the right kind of roles to be created and have the right kind of skill sets to populate those roles, then we are doomed to, even before we even begin considering any resource allocation issues. The second aspect that needs to be thought in terms of is the resource fit. Even if we have the right kind of skills and the right kind of roles that we might have, does the company have the capability to articulate those roles and skills in the right kind of a process? There's some wonderful piece of work that has been done by some colleagues in Michigan, Carl Weick in particular, who talks about know-how and know that. Whenever we are dealing with any resource allocation problems, it is not only important to know how to do it, but to know what we are going to be doing it. So the combination of know how and know what and know that helps us ensure the right kind of a resource fit. In many ways, the know how, the know that, and the know what is and allows us to have an ability to know ourselves better in the company, so that we can allocate the right kind of resources for the betterment of the corporation. And finally, another element that is very, very important as far as the resource fit is concerned is that of competence. Now, people generally tend to confuse the notion of competence with that of skills. If I have the best possible people with the right kind of skills in cybersecurity, does that really mean that we are going to be more capable? Probably not. Those skill sets have to be articulated and put in place in a given process. Those processes have to mean something, they have to be meaningful, and only then can we actually think in terms of articulating some kind of a resource fit which is going to help us in in any kind of a resource allocation. Thirdly, we need to be thinking in terms of prioritizing our resource allocations. Now, clearly, we cannot throw money and resources and people at every single problem that comes our way. We have to have some understanding of what our capacity is, how can we scale, to what extent can we scale, what are the constraints that we have. There might be some budgetary constraints, there might be some people constraints, there might be other kind of constraints that any given business and enterprise might have at any given time. So an understanding and appreciation of the constraints and the capacities that we might have helps us prioritize the resource allocations that we're going to put in place at any given point in time. And then finally is this whole notion of resource optimization. And this resource optimization really deals with two fundamental aspects: balancing whatever activities that we involve with what else is happening elsewhere in the company. Now, if we put in some kind of controls and constraints, largely from a cybersecurity perspective, but they may be in conflict with something else that is happening in the company, and hence the whole notion of securing the enterprise really is not, that objective is not achieved because we are perhaps in conflict with something else that is being done elsewhere. So an understanding of the context, being situationally aware as to what is happening elsewhere in the corporation is very, very important. And given that, one has to recalibrate as to how they are going to be moving ahead as far as cybersecurity is concerned. So resource inventory, resource fit, prioritizing resource allocation, and some kind of resource optimization are four fundamental pillars of any resource allocation. There are three categories of strategies within which resources are allocated. I like calling them strategies because resource allocation in itself is a strategic process, and this is actually a way of moving forward as far as allocating resources is concerned. Hence, it becomes very important to understand the kind of a strategy that we are trying to pursue as far as resource allocation is concerned. The first strategy is what I call a deliberate strategy. This is a strategy where we have some predefined projects or products that we are trying to move forward. These could be new security services, these could be the creation of new security processes, or some other security product that is being implemented. For example, a VPN software being implemented in a company is an example of a software product being created, but there has to be an allocated process that's going to be linked with that VPN implementation, and then hence you have a whole security process that goes with it. That's a deliberate strategy. This is essentially a top-down strategy, which is allowing a company to move forward and allocate resources. So clearly this has been thought through, and the resources that are going to be allocated have been perhaps considered, evaluated, and all the constraints have been thought through, and we are engaging in that process. So deliberate strategies are certainly one kind of strategies which we use as far as resource allocation are concerned. They are part of a broader strategic approach that any company might have. The second category of resource allocation strategies is what I call implementation of current strategy. These are projects which have already been funded. They might be security projects that we have already evaluated, and they are in the process, and they are obviously they need time and resources and people to ensure that they are executed properly. Certain resources have already been allocated, so they are ongoing projects that are currently in place. So this is the implementation of current strategy category. And the third and the final category is what I call an emergent strategy, and this is one where we don't know whether resources are going to be allocated, and we work on such projects as they appear. These might be new opportunities, these might be new innovative solutions that we have to implement given whatever changes there might be. For example, if you have some kind of a virus attack on your network, we don't know what kind of a virus attack would be. We might have to have some innovative strategies to deal with such like virus attacks. So those are new projects. We don't know. We are going to react to them as they come by, but yet we have to be proactive enough to keep resources and people at hand as to and when such opportunities arise, so that we can deal with them effectively. So there are, in summary, there are three broad categories of resource allocation strategy: something that you do in a very deliberate manner, something that where we have already thought through and they are implementation of current security strategy practices, and finally the third one, which is more emergent in nature, where we don't know what the allocation pattern is going to be. We don't have a past history of allocations. So there are the three broad categories which have to be thought through and considered whenever we are allocating. One very important element that needs to be appreciated and considered in any kind of resource allocation is that of enforcing discipline. When I say enforcing discipline, what I really mean is that we have obviously categorized different kind of strategic approaches to resource allocation in terms of deliberate strategy, in terms of ongoing implementation of current strategy, and an emergent strategy. Now, when we are dealing with allocating resources in each one of them, one should remain purist. When I say purist, I mean if you are allocating resources from deliberate, let those be deliberate strategy resource allocations. Do not take those resources and move them into implementation of current strategy or into an emergent strategy. So those resources have been allocated originally, you have budgeted them, and it's important to maintain the integrity of those budgets and the allocation of people. If you do not do so, then you will very quickly engage in some kind of a firefighting mode, because you are not necessarily following a standard path as far as resource allocation is concerned. Now, when we're dealing with deliberate strategies, they are usually transformative in nature. When I say transformative, they are essentially going to change either a process or a structure or the roles and responsibilities, the reporting structures. So those typically constitute about 10% of the allocations. The implementation of current strategies which have been thought through, which are actually emerging from your deliberate strategies, because as you go along, your deliberate strategies are going to become your current strategies. So in the implementation of current strategies, you are probably talking about allocation of about 30% or thereabouts. These are growth strategies typically, which are going to help us sustain growth of an enterprise over a period of time. Finally, you have the emergent strategies. These run at about 60% or so, because largely because we do not know of the attacks that might be coming or where the allocations might be, what kind of disasters might come our way. Typically, if some kind of a cybersecurity disaster were to occur, there is a significant amount of resources that go into planning and allocation of money and people and resources. So hence we do not know. Those are some of the rainy day funds which have to be kept in place in case there is a need for using them. If not, then we can obviously reallocate them. This is like managing snow days and inclement weather when it comes. Cities and counties and states have to be prepared adequately to deal with the consequences of bad weather. So we do not know, and many a times we are dealing with those crises on the fly. We know what to do, but we don't know how much it's going to consume, how much time and effort they are going to consume. So it's important to enforce some kind of a discipline, but yet operate within the confines of each of the three strategies as far as cybersecurity is concerned.